Okay, great. So yeah, thanks to everybody for coming despite the everyday civilization is crumbling around us, it seems like, but today seems to be a pretty active day for that. So it's a great pleasure to welcome Tara Nummedal, I guess, back to UC Davis, if only virtually via Zoom. Uh, Tara started her graduate studies in the UC Davis History Department long ago, but then followed her dissertation advisor, Paula Findlin, who moved to Stanford, I guess, after her first year or second, something like that, second year. Yeah. But so almost, we could almost claim Tara as an alumna, but
I got a master's degree from
the
history department.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't see that on the back of your book. Anyways, speaking of which, this is the book that Katrina mentioned, Tara's first book from way back in 2009, maybe 7, a long time ago. Alchemy and Authority in the Holy Roman Empire. And in 2019, Tara published Anna Zieglerin and the Lion's Blood, Alchemy and End Times in Reformation Germany. And both of these books, for instance, in contrast to the subject today, Michael Maier, who some of you might be familiar with, he's a very famous and extremely learned kind of high society alchemist, and I guess, as we'll be learning, poet, musician. In both Tara's books, these are individuals not so well remembered by history, whose extraordinary careers, especially Anna Zieglerin, the alchemist, prophetess, etc., of her latest book, recovered in the archives. Tara is probably the world authority on the Wolfenbüttel, the little-known Wolfenbüttel municipal archives, unlike the famous Herzog August Bibliothek, where everyone goes and ignores the fact that there's a local archive, which is, as Tara has taught us in both books, is filled with treasures. And I guess even more recently than the 2019 Anna Zieglerin book is the book that Tara will be talking to us about today, which is a digital publication. I think she's gonna, among other things, show us a bit of it. But if you haven't done it already with the link that was in the announcement, I really encourage you to spend some time on the website that is the interface of this digital edition, because it's a wonderful edition. In some parts, just the way such a thing might be, the scholarly essays and so forth, but the implementation of the kind of digital interface with the music and the images is really, it's hard to think of many digital humanities projects that are realized, not just a good idea, but realized so well. So hopefully I haven't stolen too much thunder, but just whet everyone's appetite. And so I'll turn it over to you, Tara.
Thank you. And it's really nice to meet all of you. And I'm really excited to have such a wide range of people and music people and everybody here. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen as we do these days. And we will get started. All right, you all are off to the side so I can see you as well. All right, so yes, thank you so much also for this invitation. I did begin grad school at Davis, and it always has I have a soft spot for it, so I wish I could be there in person with you, but this is good too. So I'd like to begin, well, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today about Furnace and Fugue, but the two books that are a part of this project. So the one on the left, Atalanta, Fugiens, which is Michael Maier's 1618 musical alchemical emblem book. And then the one on the right, Furnace and Fugue, which is an interactive, layered, multimedia digital edition of this 17th century book, which includes a collection of new essays that I co-edited with Donna Billack. So I just want to flag Donna, who is a kind of absent presence here and very much equally a part of this project as well. So we created this book at Brown with the support of the Mellon-funded Digital Publishing Initiative. And we published it last summer with UVA Press as part of their Studies in Early Modern German History as an open access, free, all digital publication. So you can just click on furnaceandfugue.org and take a look. So what I'd like to do tonight is to talk a bit about first the 17th century book, Atalanta, Fugiens, and then I'll give you a brief tour of Furnace and Fugue, showing you how we reimagined Maier's really extraordinary 17th century book as a digital edition for the 21st century. And I don't usually think of the 17th century as, you know, on the eve of the 30 Years' War as a fun time period, but maybe given the start that we've had in 2021, it'll be fun to kind of go back in time a little bit and explore this wonderland where things are a little bit different. So let's begin with the title page. So the centerpiece of Furnace and Fugue is Atalanta Fugiens, which was printed in 1618 by Hieronymus Galler for the publisher Johann Theodor de Brie in Oppenheim, Germany. The author was Michael Maier, who is a German physician, alchemist, polymath, Rosicrucian defender, author of 20 printed books about alchemy and medicine, music, Rosicrucian brotherhood, including Atalanta Fugiens. Maier was an itinerant physician with a deep, deep interest in alchemy. Early in his life, he worked as a vendor of Galenic simples, but what he really wanted to make was potable gold, the golden alchemical panacea. He moved to Prague in 1608 and became a personal physician to the Habsburg Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II, who granted Maier the title of Imperial Palatine. Maier eventually left Rudolf's service 2 years later in 1610, and he spent the rest of his life wandering around the Holy Roman Empire and London in search of patronage and secrets. His most famous book today is Atalanta Fugiens, or Atalanta Fleeing. And so I'd like to sort of dive into this book. The title alerts us right from the start that this book will be a multimedia delight, right? Atalanta Fleeing, that is, the new chemical emblems on the secrets of nature, adapted partly to the eyes and intellect, partly to the ears and the soul's recreation, to be seen, read, reflected upon, comprehended, weighed, sung, and heard. And if we look more closely at the etchings around the title page, this book will elaborate on the myth of Atalanta. So this is the Ovid's version of the myth of Atalanta. Some of you may know it from there. Some of you may know it from Free to Be You and Me, which was my first introduction to the story of Atalanta. And this is the myth about the fleet-footed huntress named Atalanta, whose father wanted her to marry. And she agreed to marry only someone who could beat her in a race. And many men tried, of course, but none could beat her until along came a suitor, Hippomenes, to take up the challenge. And Hippomenes was fortunate enough to get some help from Venus, who gave him 3 golden apples from the Garden of Hesperides and instructed him to toss them in Atalanta's path so that she would stop and pick them up, and then he could win the race. Hippomenes, of course, did as instructed, and he wins the race, and he and Atalanta marry. In their delight over their new union, however, they forgot to thank Venus, who becomes furious and causes them to become inflamed with lust and thus consummate their love in the temple of Cybele. And now they have 2 angry goddesses after them. And eventually the lovers are turned into a pair of lions, condemned to pull Cybele's chariot for all eternity. So we can see this story unfolding just right on the title page. In the epigram, though, Maier reveals that it's really all about alchemy, right? So he explains that Atalanta equals mercury, Hippomenes is sulfur, the 2 kind of fundamental elements or principles of alchemical theory, and that their union represents the construction of the Philosopher's Stone, which Maier tells us will produce health and wealth. So it seems to be about Atalanta, but it turns out it's really about alchemy. And when you turn the page, after all the preparatory material and some additional front matter, the book begins to unfold as a series of 50 emblem sets, each of which is 4 pages. So this is an example of one of the emblem sets. Pages 1 and 2 are the emblem, followed by a 2-page Latin discourse explaining everything, supposedly, although not really. And of course, as many of you will know, emblems were a really fashionable genre in the early modern period. And what Maier is doing here is repurposing them for his own uses. So I want to zoom in just a little bit more closely to the parts of an emblem in Atalanta fugiens. So on the right side, many of you will know this, but of course, from top to bottom, you have the motto, the pictura, and the epigram. And then what Maier does on the left side, you have the motto and the epigram again, but this time translated into German. And then instead of the pictura, we have a fugue, really a canon, but Maier wants to make a pun on fugiens, so they're fugues for the purposes of our text tonight. And in these fugues, two voices sing together a different canon melody in each of the emblems. So there are 50 different melodies. And they sing over a third part, which is the same in all of the 50 emblems. It's a cantus firmus, and in this case, it's liturgical music, and it comes from a popular setting of the Mass, a portion of the Kyrie Cuncta Potens Genitor Deus. The voices in these canons are our main characters from Ovid's myth. So we have Atalanta, or the voice fleeing, we have Hippomenes, or the voice following, and then we have the apple delaying. And so that's, once again, we see these, figures from myth, but in fact, the lyrics they're singing come from the accompanying epigram here, which is all about chemistry, or sometimes natural history or math. So it's very sort of disorienting from right off the bat. You have these ancient, figures singing liturgical music over, singing words about chemistry or whatever else there is. So Atalanta fugiens, in this sort of series of 50 emblems, sets out a weird and wonderful alchemical realm where ancient Greek and Roman deities and heroes and early modern European mortals mingle with fantastic landscapes and elaborate interiors. The layout of the book itself is elegant in its symmetry. The musical scores on the left mirror the images on the right. And together with the surrounding text and subsequent discourses, each emblem set makes a really nice package of music, image, and text. And Maier's proposal here is that both the four parts of any one emblem set and the parts of the 214-page quarto book as a whole were meant to work together, right? That the music, images, and text are meant to guide the reader not only through the tale of Atalanta and Hippomenes, but also through a thicket of musical puzzles, classical references, and alchemical theory and practices related to the production of powerful medicines or precious metals, and might even lead to knowledge about the origins and the transformation of matter in the Philosopher's Stone. So this book is really which is nice. And I want to give you, sort of zoom in a little deeper to give you one example and look at one of the emblems in more detail, and that's emblem 11, Whiten Latona interior books. So how might a 17th century person read this emblem? So you'd begin probably with the motto, Whiten Latona and rip up your books. And I have to say this particular emblem has become the kind of, emblem of Furnace and Fugue altogether, that we've often thought of ourselves as kind of ripping up this book as we created the digital edition. So this is my favorite emblem. Anyone in the 17th century well-versed in the corpus of alchemical text, though, would immediately have recognized the dictum Rumpite libros, or tear your books, as a bit of advice to alchemists who are sure to find the alchemical corpus misleading, confusing, and it's a suggestion that sometimes you just need to get rid of the books. They're only going to confuse you, right? Now, so that might be familiar to some readers. If not, you can look at the picture, and here you see this philosopher, or this sort of ancient-looking man, ripping up his books, and you can see the pile of books down at his feet. What about the first half, though, the Whiten Latona? To find out about this, you have to go into the epigram, which is where Maier really starts to show off. And here he begins to sort of display his erudition by making a clever pun on Latona, who is a figure from Greek and Roman mythology, mostly known for giving birth to Apollo and Diana. So Latona, and then Latin, or brass, which is an important material for alchemists. So this epigram here explains that the Latin needs to be cleansed, the impurities need to be removed as an important step in the process of making the Philosopher's Stone. So now the big pictura above begins to make a little more sense. So we see Latona here, recognizable by her twins, Apollo and Diana, or Sol and Luna, who also happen to be important alchemical materials for those who are well-versed in the alchemical corpus. And we see Latona getting washed or purified by this man on the left, who is perhaps maybe a philosopher once again, or perhaps the assistant of the philosopher who's ripping up the books on the right. We don't really know. Now that would be enough for an ordinary emblem book, but Maier, of course, likes to gild the lily. So he offers the epigram on the left in German as well. Maybe your Latin's not quite up to snuff. And he has Atalanta, Hippomenes, and the apple sing the words from the Latin epigram as well about Latona and Latin and so on and so on. And of course, the most dedicated reader could also go deeper, turning the page and reading the two-page Latin discourse, which purported to clarify everything and offered Maier more opportunities to show his erudition. So there's quite a bit you can do in a single emblem. And if we're imagining a 17th century reader, having lingered for a while on emblem 11, we might imagine that the reader would then turn the page, turn to the next emblem and repeat. But she might choose to do something else instead. So maybe as she was reading emblem 11, the pun on Latona and Latin rings a bell and reminds her of the title page, where she recalls me seeing Ladon up at the top, the dragon who guards the Garden of Hesperides, where the golden apples that Venus gave to Hippomenes grow. So maybe there's an additional pun there, an additional clue on Latona, Latin, Ladon. Maybe our reader realizes how important those strange toddlers, Apollo and Diana, or Sol and Luna, are, because of course she's read enough alchemical literature to know that they're probably important alchemical materials as well. And so our reader might flip ahead in the book as well to see maybe those two figures appear again. And of course they do. They show up, for example, in emblem 25, where we see them again, all grown up, and they're bludgeoning a dragon here, who looks a little bit like Ladon, but who's actually a different dragon, Python, whom we are told in the epigram and the discourse has to be slayed by both Sol and Luna, or Apollo and Diana. And of course, Sol and Luna appear in a couple of other emblems as well, 11, 23, 25, 30, and 34. So we might imagine our reader saying, okay, these two appear in two of them, maybe they appear in others as well. So the point is that there are a lot of different ways. Maier's offering his readers a lot of different ways to read this book. A reader could linger on a single emblem and explore all the relationships among the parts. A reader might choose to sing the music, perhaps, look more deeply at the image, go back and forth between the German and the Latin. There's a lot you can do within just a single emblem. But a reader might also choose to read the emblem sequentially, looking for some kind of across the emblems, or even to read the emblems out of order, following what are essentially hyperlinks, sort of jumping across Maier's emblematic wonderland to see whether these new connections might reveal otherwise unseen connections, maybe some hidden alchemical secret. Now, Atalanta Fugiens, Daniel mentioned, is a very well-known book, particularly to historians of alchemy, to alchemists themselves, bibliophiles, early music people, graphic designers. Lots of people really love this book. And this is a book that I'm fortunate to have a copy of at Brown in our special collections. And I had often taken my students to see this book. And it's a quarto, so it's about the size of an iPad. And they would sort of look at it and go, cool. I can't read any of it. I don't know what to make of any of it. And, sometimes I would say more, and other times we were looking at other things, and we didn't do too much more with it. But of course, the book has had a very long afterlife, and its afterlife begins already in the 17th century, where more informed readers than my students and I really kind of made the book their own in all kinds of interesting ways. So I just want to give you a taste of the book's afterlife before we get to our version of it. Some readers, of course, colored it, and these are a couple of copies that were hand colored, probably long after the publication date of 1618. Other readers translated it in manuscripts, and this is an example of French copy. And you'll note that it has the image from one of the emblems and it has the text, but there's no music, right? So you can see readers beginning to make choices about which parts matter. And here's a copy from the Beinecke, another translation into English. This is one that we've worked closely with, and I'll say a bit more in a moment, but this is the English translation that we used in Furnace and Fugue. And you can see here that there are no images, there's no music. This is just a translation of the text. It may have been a fair copy, so there might have been more intended here than we have. But in any case, this is another example of an early modern kind of appropriation of the text, and some completely recreated it into other media entirely. And I just want to show you these because I love this. This is a series of wooden panels from the Ritman Library in Amsterdam, part of the Bibliotheca Philosophica Hermetica. And here you can see that some of the emblems have been recreated on a series of wood panels, and images from other alchemical texts woven into them. So the sort of gray figures in the middle come from other ones, and they're completely out of sequence once again. So the top wood panel has emblem 50 on the end and emblem 1 on the other end, and so on. Eventually in 1687, Atalanta Fugiens was reprinted, but without the music. And this completely disrupts the rhythm of the book, making each 4-page emblem set only 3 pages, and giving the book, which has in the original a very nice kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, giving it a kind of syncopated rhythm instead. People have continued to kind of make of the book what they will today, and I'll just give you a few more examples of some artists who have reimagined it. Here's an artist, Zia Morvitz, who you can see has kind of reimagined one of the emblems. And here's another one that I really like from an artist, a book artist, Daniel Kelm, who has created this articulated sculpture version of the book. Singers and musicians, of course, have recorded the music in multiple different formats, from kind of period style to audio centaur, which is a kind of, I don't know, heavy metal dirge kind of thing, classical MIDI. There are lots of different versions of this, of the music. Designers have used the original etchings for all kinds of reasons, including on this 1969 album called Alchemy. And modern alchemists continue to be inspired by this text. And so here's a Instagram user photographing her alchemist's breakfast, which includes quite prominently Atalanta Fugiens. And in fact, we, when we were beginning this project, created an Instagram account to play around with this as well. And in the year 2018, which was the anniversary of the publication of the book, each week we published on Instagram one of the emblems with a commentary from all kinds of different people. So that was a really interesting experiment in terms of audience that I would be happy to comment on. Of course, scholars of early modern things have also studied this book as well. So I want to say a word about what we see as the scholarly intervention here of Furnace and Fugue, and particularly the collection of essays. Previous scholars have understood Atalanta Fugiens in various ways. So first and foremost, it really is a virtuoso performance of print, right? All the different fonts, it's as if, the printers were sort of showing everything they could do. German fonts, Latin fonts, copperplate etchings, printed music, right? It's a beautiful collectible book. It's also an experiment with genre. It adds music to the emblem book genre that was quite popular in the early modern period. It's also very much a patronage ploy. Machiavelli's Prince has been described as one of the world's greatest job applications, but I think this one is up there too. Maier was definitely in search of employment, and we can also see Atalanta Fugiens as a bid for patronage and as a sort of display of alchemy's, or at least an aspirational display of alchemy's prestige as an erudite, humanist, courtly science worthy of a prince, right? Not just a dirty artisanal craft. And historians of early modern knowledge have mostly seen it primarily as a literary or a philosophical work, closely linked with Hermeticism, Rosicrucianism, of course, and other occult philosophies. All of these studies have advanced our understanding of Atalanta Fugiens in really important ways. And our book, our digital book, Furnace and Fugue, builds on them. But we also are trying to take a different approach here. One of the things about all the previous studies of Atalanta fugiens, and very understandably so, is that they tended to focus on one part of it. So the musicologists focused on the music, the literary people focused on the sources of the epigrams and the discourses. The historians of alchemy thought about the alchemy. And certainly, deep disciplinary expertise is crucial for situating Maier's project in its specific philosophical, artistic, literary, or musical context. But we wanted to explore Atalanta fugiens as a multimedia artifact, as a book that could not, in fact, be entirely broken apart without losing something, without losing its core meaning. And it was that kind of, interdisciplinary piece of it that we were really interested in. It's not easy, though, to approach this book. So for any single person in 1618, Maier could, in fact, reasonably expect a single reader to have the erudition and the skill set to engage with this book. But today, it's hard to find people with this set of skills. And so we decided early on that unpacking the riches of Atalanta fugiens really required multidisciplinary collaboration. And in that sense, of course, as you all know, we're very in sync with universities' desires these days as well. So maybe that's part of it. So built in from the start of this project, we tried to build in this collaboration from the start with a series of workshops with scholars of early modern print, music, art, philosophy, mathematics, mathematicians, historians of alchemy, as well as singers and rare books curators, digital humanists, and students. The essays that resulted here are from a range of types of scholars, but they really do not reflect the range of people that we kind of talked with about this book along the way. Second, Furnace and Fugue also aims to revisit Maier's masterpiece in light of what is sometimes called the new history of alchemy. And that is, real transformation in the last couple of decades in how we understand early modern alchemy. So once seen either negatively as superstition or pseudoscience, or on the other hand, much more positively, but as occult wisdom, the flip side of Enlightenment rationality. Early modern alchemy is now also recognized as a fundamentally, and maybe primarily recognized as a fundamentally material endeavor, right? A series of practices deeply engaged with understanding and enacting the transformation of matter and closely associated with early modern science and medicine. And so informed by this new scholarly consensus in the history of alchemy, Furnace and Fugue approaches Atalanta fugiens not only as a literary or a philosophical text, cleverly adorned with music as well, but also as an invocation of actual laboratory technologies. So this is just one example here of one of the laboratory processes that are represented in this book. This is King Duanech, I think is how you pronounce it, who is suffering from melancholy and an excess of bile, and whose Dr. Farrett cured him. And he looks like he's taking a nice sauna, but it's also a representation of a vapor bath in a particular kind of alchemical furnace here. So that's just sort of one example. So our interventions into the academic study of Atalanta fugiens are twofold. We're very interested and focused on how early modern people might have used this book in order to create new insights into nature's secrets, by reordering, resequencing, or focusing on different elements of Atalanta fugiens' book. So we very much see it as a kind of tool that could be manipulated in order to produce new kinds of meanings. We also want to reframe Atalanta fugiens as a commentary on shifting anxieties around early modern disciplines that bridged sense and intellect, theory and practice, scholarship and craft in the early 17th century. So Maier is really proposing here an embodied reading practice. He's encouraging his readers to activate multiple senses, not only the intellect, but also the body. And so looking at the emblems, thinking about the emblems, singing the emblems, or perhaps listening to others sing those emblems, in other words, were to cultivate the particular habits of body and mind that Maier saw as central to the practice of alchemy. And the same interplay between mind and body was, of course, at work in some of the other disciplines, if you will, that Maier integrates into this work: music, art, mathematics, right? So it's no accident that all of these things are present as well. They are also these kind of hybrid forms of knowledge that are both theoretical and practical, intellectual and embodied. So when Donna and I began to collaborate around Atalanta fugiens, we immediately thought that digital technologies would be the best way both to advance our scholarly arguments and also to present our work, to sort of, thinking about audience. We wanted to make Maier's book accessible to those today who lack Maier's erudition, which is most of us, fellow scholars, as well as students and musicians and alchemists and others. We also wanted to follow Maier's experimentation with the technology of the printed book into the 21st century to make it possible for contemporary readers today to hear and see and manipulate and investigate Atalanta fugiens in ways that Maier might have imagined when he created it, yet were impossible to fully realize before now. So what I'd like to do is switch over to the digital edition now. So I'm going to stop share and I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to share this instead, and hopefully this will work. Okay. Oops. All right. So I'm going to do a bit of show and tell here. So Furnace and Fugue, this is the landing page, it's furnaceandfugue.org, and it has two main parts. It is both an edition of Atalanta fugiens and a new set of essays about Atalanta fugiens and a few other things around the edges as well. But what I hope to show you is the way in which these two things are integrated. The edition and the scholarly essays are very much integrated together. And that was one of the things that was really important to us as we created this. So I'll start with the edition of Maier's wonderful book, which offers various ways to play around with the parts of any emblem. So I'm going to navigate to emblem 11, which is the one that we were looking at earlier. Whiten Latona and tear up your books. And one more, here we are. So when you arrive on an emblem this way, there are multiple different ways to read one of Maier's emblems. And I'm going to start with the text, and then I'll get to the music and the images. So you can do it in a comparative view this way, where you can see the original and our modern edition side by side. You can look at the modern edition here in several different languages. And as I said, we drew on this 17th century English translation from the Beinecke for our translation. So it's a period translation. You can look at it in diplomatic or normalized. You can read it in Latin. You can read it in German, or at least the original German parts in their original languages. You can also, if you want to simplify things, you can just read it as an original book. So for this erudite crowd, perhaps you don't need the help of the translations. You just want to go through, and you can go through page by page like this. And you can also, let me get one with an image. Here we go. You can really zoom in actually quite closely to some of the images if you really want to get into the cross hatching and so on. We'll go back to the comparative view here. Oops, I'll zoom back out. Now, so there are multiple ways to engage with the text depending on what you're interested in and what your expertise is. Now I want to say a word about the music. We created new recordings of each of the 50 fugues. So we commissioned new recordings of the music. And one of the reasons we wanted to do that was because we wanted to record each of the voices separately so that you could turn them on and off if you wanted to isolate one part of it. So I'm going to play you emblem 11 here, and then I'll start to play around with turning the voices piano roll feature.
Latone solem non novit nemo gemellam seu fet famavetus que jovenata fuit.
So if you just wanted to listen to the apple.
Tradunt Cum luna lumine solis mixta nigre
Get rid of the apple.
in facie macule macule
And
Latonam ergo pares albes ceres dam accedantes ambiguos faciet morarum libros.
okay. So you can see that, depending on, so for those of us who can't read early modern music, which is a lot of us, you can just listen to it, right, instead. But if you want to start to play around with what's going on with the different voices and, the fugue part of it and the cantus firmus and so on and so on. And when we initially, our first workshop that we did with this, we had some singers with us as well. And when we had sort of crazy theories about maybe these two emblems are related. And so we asked them to try to sing those two fugues at the same time to see if there was something about the dissonance that made it not work, or, so there's a lot that you could play around with this if you wanted to. I also want to mention that we have a performance edition created by Les Canards Chantants, which is a group in Philadelphia. And so for those who like to, who can and wish to perform, there's a modern performance edition as a PDF to go ahead and perform as well. Now I want to go, so that's the music. And next I want to go to the images. So if we go back to this and click on this image tag up here, you can see all the images just as kind of thumbnails, we would say, as a quick way to remember them. So if you wanted to look at any one of them, such as emblem 6 here, you could click view and, just go back to that view that we were just looking at. You could also, each image is tagged with all these sorts of things. So if you wanted to look, well, let's just go for it and say gold, you could click on gold and it will pull up other images that deal with gold. So you can begin to kind of search and filter these things. And you can also search by these keywords up at the top. So for example, nature, you could search by smoke and see what comes up. Of course, there's a lot of smoke. You could search by traits. You could, look for babies or pregnant people or crowns, different sorts of clothing, classical or early modern clothing, nude. You could go to creatures and search for particular animals. There are a lot of animals in here, of course. So let's search for dragons and see what comes up. And we find 4 emblems that feature dragons. We've already started to look at a couple of those. And then what you can do, if you want to, is begin to create a collection. So let's take this one where Sol and Luna are bludgeoning Python. And you can click collection and then click collection and then click create a new collection, which is hard to say. Yeah, and you can call it whatever you want. I happen to have pre-created this collection, which is down on this orange thing that pops up. And you can see that I've created a dragon collection where I have placed all the emblems that deal with dragons. So if I have some theory about dragons being significant because whatever, you can see that they're all waiting for me there. And then you can copy the URL and you can save it. You can send it to your professor if you're a student or your friend and share with them your brilliant insights about the role of dragons in this book. So this collections feature was also really important to us in terms of allowing readers, to begin to create their own paths through this book. And so what we're hoping is that Furnace and Fugue makes possible the kind of playful capabilities that Maier envisioned, while also enabling and encouraging completely new modern emblem book. Right? We're hoping that it begins to generate new interpretations of it. So I'm very curious to see what people end up doing with this. So now if I go back to the landing page here and go to contents, I just want to highlight a few more things in terms of the ways in which you can engage with this book. these 3 get acquainted essays are very short, and they're for readers who are completely new to all of this. If you don't know anything about alchemy, you can read about it here from Jenny Rampling. If you don't know anything about Maier, you can follow his life, and you can see some nice features about his travels. If you want to see what Padua looks like, you can see a contemporary image, and so on. And for those who are, I guess I'll go this way, interested in the history of printing, this is a really nice essay by Stephen Tabor at the Huntington, and includes a lot of great stuff about how early modern books were created. We also have these scholarly essays. And I've already showed you the table of contents. I just want to show you I'll use my own essay as an example here, the ways in which we integrated the edition into the essays themselves. So there are some digital features here designed to slow down reading. We tend to scroll very quickly, right? So you could, first of all, you can zoom in on images here. But for example, the spotlight feature forces you to slow down and go through all the different spotlights so you don't scroll too fast. And then built in, there are a few other features that I just want to show you as well. So the footnotes here pop up on the side. Oh, look, there's Paula Finland. There are also, when you get to a particular emblem from Atalanta fugiens, you see this plus, and you can again add it. So I could add it to my dragons collection if I wanted to, or I could create a new collection. And then when we get down here to compare emblems, you see that the Sol and Luna collection is pre-created if I wanted to. And I could add that to my emblem collection as well. And as it happens, I've already created a Sol and Luna collection, so you can see the multiple emblems in which they appear, starting as toddlers, and then as they grow up and have a incestuous affair later on, you can drag these around and so on. So all to say that, and the ones that involve music more than my particular essay does, has the sound embedded as well, and some other visualizations, and they all sorts of do different sorts of things. So Furnace and Fugue is really aiming to follow Maier's lead. We've turned reading Atalanta fugiens into the multimedia embodied experience that Maier visioned, right? We're trying to engage the ears and the eyes and the intellect, but we've done so by giving modern users an assist, especially with the music. And at the same time, we've gone a bit beyond what Maier, I think, would have imagined. And sometimes I actually wonder if we've betrayed him a bit by making Atalanta fugiens too accessible. A colleague of mine pointed out to me a number of years ago, the original book, of course, does not sing when you open it. And that's true. Even Maier's 17th century readers had to do that part themselves, if in fact they did, and they may not have. Music might have been just kind of theoretical or intellectual for them as well. But now you can just press play and listen to the recordings. You can also use the search function to just quickly locate all the emblems with birds, for example, rather than taking the time to kind of find them all by yourself. And those who don't know German and Latin can just, read Atalanta fugiens in English. So are we cheating a bit by making Maier's game too easy? Maybe, but Maier's world is not our world, and the stakes and the status of alchemical knowledge have changed. I think that we need to remember Maier's delight in the technology of print. And had he lived today, I think he would have been just as eager to take advantage of digital technologies as he was to take advantage of the possibilities of print in 1618. So I will stop here so that I can see you all again, although I can bring anything up again if we want to. And I hope there's some time for discussion or questions.
Shall you, and thanks so much, Tara, that was fantastic. Do you want to just field your own questions? I think you can see everybody's names.
I think we can do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess everyone has their ways of making themselves known.
I should pull up the chat here as well. Yeah. Colin?
I can go first. Well, I mean, first of all, I've looked through the website before, but seeing you go through all of the different features, I just have to say how extraordinary and exquisite that interface really is. It is just kind of breathtaking to see all the features that you've built into it. So I don't know, there's lots of this text, especially in a moment where political conspiracy theories seem so widespread. This feels like a conspiracy theory text that kind of invites even more conspiracy theories about what the conspiracy theory means. So there's lots of interpretive questions that I have. So
Yeah.
there's, if I can have two, hopefully one is an easy question. You mentioned that Sol and Luna are important alchemical forces or substances, and I was wondering what those were. And then second, I guess sort of more broadly, because of this text or the way that this interface works, you seem to be emphasizing multiplicity and the various ways in which this book can be read or interpreted or understood. And I'm very curious about the reception history, whether this book has been treated as a text that has lots of different hidden information in it, or whether it is all a giant arrow pointed to the creation of the Philosopher's Stone. And if you simply get the parts right, then some one truth sort of tumbles out of it. So I'm sort of very curious about people's reactions to it.
Yeah, thank you. And to your first kind comment, I just want to say from the outset that this book was created, and book was possible, Furnace and Fugue, I mean, was possible because of this incredible funding that Brown got. This is not, and I'm really happy to talk about the kind of questions of accessibility to projects like this. I'm happy to talk about that. And also just career diversity and the different people who are involved in this project who are in all different kinds of positions with, in the academy. Sol and Luna, this is a problem with alchemy, is you can never pin down what they are. So sometimes they're gold and silver, sometimes they're sulfur and mercury. And that's precisely the point, is that's the fun of it. To the second question though, one of the things we talked about a lot in creating this is it a puzzle or is it a game? So a puzzle is one that you solve and you put that last piece in and you have your picture and you know how to make the Philosopher's Stone or whatever. Or is it a game that you can play again and again and again, and every time you play it sort of turns out differently? And we really, and by we, I think I mean Donna and I at this point, and I don't want to speak for all the people who were involved because we don't all agree in our interpretations of this book, which is great. But Donna and I really see this mostly as a game that is meant to just keep generating things. And I think that that's one of the things that's so fascinating about it. And I mentioned that we had these 2 interdisciplinary workshops before we started creating this, where we just brought in lots of scholars from lots of different perspectives. And rather than having us each give papers, we just talked about the book all weekend for these 2 weekends, and entertained all kinds of bonkers ideas just for fun. Like for a while, we got the idea that the background landscapes might all connect like the way Vesalius's connects, and if you line up and we're like, clearly there's something going on in the background. And then we were going to do virtual reality, Atalanta land, and okay, it all got sort of scaled back. But there may yet be something going on in the background. Actually, Michael Gaudio's essay, who's an art historian, does explore that question of the landscapes and the foreground. Who knows, right? I don't know the answer to that. And I think this question about, there are examples in alchemical literature of these sort of German picture poems that are actually sequential. Sol and Luna is an example of a late medieval manuscript that you could read as a sequence of steps. But in this case, even if that is the case, it's sort of embedded in this whole other thing. And if you start reading the Latin discourses, they're all over the place. And so I really see the discourses as a kind of window onto the alchemical corpus. I mean, it's Maier saying there's this book that's important, there's that book. Sometimes he cites his authors, other times he doesn't. He's also doing something similar with the music. So one of the great discoveries for my colleague Lauren Ludwig, maybe the music people here might know him, is that we always thought that Maier wrote all of these fugues and that he was just kind of a crappy musician because they're not very good, apparently. This is not my judgment, but this is what my musicologist colleagues tell me. It turns out that Lauren Ludwig discovered that Maier lifted 40 of the 50 fugues from a late 16th century English collection of ways. And then the question is, where are the remaining 10 from? And the remaining 10 are the worst ones. So maybe he did try to write those last ones. But so he's, borrowing music in an early modern sense. He's, and then kind of weaving it together with this text that is itself borrowing from all these other things. And so, I think you can never, the short answer is no, I don't think there's one interpretation. And I think that's one of the things that makes this book fascinating still, is that you can always just unravel it in different ways. And I haven't taught much with it yet, but I had a student write a paper on the salamander emblem, and he ended up writing this amazing paper about salamanders and early modern alchemy and natural history. And he just started with that 1-2-page discourse and then kind of went in and came out with this great paper on salamanders. So I think that's an example of the way it functions as a kind of portal into other worlds as well. I think Joan and then Anna, yeah.
So this is completely mind-blowing in the most wonderful sense. And I do buy into your notion that Maier, who has created a work that has not just different layers, but also different directions and modes and so forth, would love the idea that you could go to this kind of digital wonderland. And I lack the vocabulary to say how many different, layers, dimensions, modes, directions, permutations and combinations you've offered to the user. I wonder, just because I can't imagine what this process of creation was like, even if it was a collective undertaking, whether there were things that you thought of that you could do and you could build into this product, but decided not to, or whether everything you thought of is there.
Well, this is where my partnership with Donna, I should say something about. So Donna is Atalanta and I'm Hippomenes. So I don't know if any of you know her. She's like constant idea generator and incredibly creative. And she was like, we'll do a, comic book version, and she wanted to go track down every physical copy of Atalanta fugiens. And she has visited a lot of them, but we thought it was important to bring people back to the physical books as well, right? And like we could imagine a part 2 of this where there were all the different library copies of it, because of course they have marginalia and they have, and et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to work on Atalanta fugiens for the rest of my life. So I was Hippomenes trying to catch her and like pin her down and fix Mercury and stabilize her. Because I wanted it to end. And I think that says something, that says something about the book, again, that it's like just constantly. One of the things that we did think about, so my colleague at Brown, Neil Saphir, brought this up at one of our early workshops, is this question of when are we doing something that was not Maier, that we had sort of gone too far, right? And so, Maier was a snob. He would not want just anyone to read this book and understand it. And he really wouldn't have. He wanted alchemy to be, privileged knowledge. So we have, as I said, kind of betrayed him. Donna doesn't agree with me on that, but anyway. But okay, he printed a book, so he couldn't reshuffle the emblems all the time, but maybe he intended readers to figure that out themselves. So that's in keeping with him. But might there have been readings that went too far? And should there be like a little, Neil said, like a little flag that comes up that says, danger, you're leaving the early modern period now. You're, this music, for example, and I would love to hear from the music people here. We have no idea if Maier intended anyone to bend over this book and actually sing it. It's very small. And we had the singers try and they all clonked their heads together. And the music is interesting intellectually, I think, more than it is as sound, in some ways. So, we're assuming that he wanted people to sing it. That might have been wrong, and yet we kind of need help because we can't quite see, many of us, the intellectual games that he's playing with intervals and fugues and and all of that stuff. So that's kind of a rambling answer, but those were some of the things. Mostly I think it could go on forever as a project, and that would be both too expensive first and foremost, and just never ending. And as much as I love this book, I did want to move on. So
Thanks.
I think Anna, and I see hands as well. So then maybe Tiffany and is it Tekla? But Anna.
And I should say, I think my internet is unstable, so I may be cutting in and out. And also my son is screaming in the background. So my apologies for both. But I wanted to take you up on your offer to talk a little bit about the sort of mechanics of doing a project like this, because like everyone who's spoken up until now, I'm in awe of this work, and was just discussing with a colleague a 1,000-page tome that has just arrived in, dead tree form, and lamenting all of the missed opportunities of the love and effort that went into this labor, but particularly for future students is, kind of lost in many ways, because these are not the ways that future generations are going to be doing research primarily. And so both sort of what you see, and you touched on that a little bit, of training students' eyes and being able to slow them down and to help to guide them in their reading, but also sort of what obstacles as sort of from your position within academia, and you were talking about, different sort of career paths, and what needs to get done? How does one finagle, whatever your chosen verb is, a project like this, apart from getting funding?
Yeah. So maybe to the first question, when I first had my students work with this, it was a prototype version of it. And I was actually just looking over my notes about this because I'm teaching the same class this semester, and was trying to remember how I introduced it to them. And I had this whole thing about how, this is a different way of reading that you're not familiar with. Did not faze them at all. They had no questions. They immediately knew how to navigate it and how to zoom around throughout it. And they were completely comfortable. I was the one, my colleagues were the ones who were uncomfortable. And I will say, I'm wondering if people will read the essays as closely and as seriously as they would if it were paper. Several people have asked me if there's a paper component to this, and there's not. You could cut and paste, you could print it out, of course. But I do think, we scroll, we doom scroll, we scroll a lot these days. And I wonder, whether this book will get the serious intellectual engagement that we hope for the essays. That's a question that I have. And the first question, so Donna Billick is an independent scholar. She had a postdoc working on this book and at the Chemical Heritage Foundation, which is now the Science History Institute in Philadelphia. And through her postdoc, she had funding to put together the first one of these workshops, and to which she invited me. And, we all had fun for the weekend singing the book, and they made us all sing and playing around with the book and everything. And then it was the usual, so collection of essays, right? And I said, Brown just got this big Mellon grant. I think they're looking for digital projects. I wonder if this would be a good fit. And of course, they were looking for digital projects. They were looking for content. And so it was fortuitous timing. Donna's an independent scholar. Lauren Ludwig is an independent scholar. We have the singers who are performers, professional singers, musicians. So we have untenured people. The question of tenure, I think, is a really important one, and tenure track, and in academia and out of academia. I think what Donna would say, and she and I have talked about this a lot over the years, is that for her, not being in a tenure track position actually gave her the freedom to do this kind of project for her first book in ways that me doing it not as my tenure book and not as my promotion book also gave me the freedom to do this book. So even though we're in different sorts of positions, in that sort of tenure hierarchy, both of us were kind of liberated to do this book and to not really worry about whether we were going to get a job or keep a job or get promoted. And that was really important for both of us. At the same time, the fact that the project had to be, it's not doable unless you have the funding. So, we can talk about the funding, but that's obviously crucial. but also the whole institutional infrastructure of Brown, that helped us create this. We relied on, there were a couple of people whose positions were funded entirely by the Mellon Digital Publishing Initiative, including the digital editor who worked with us at Brown. And UVA Press, of course, did the copy editing, but it was mostly created at Brown. But we also relied on programmers who were at Brown doing other things as well, and the DH people, and the data visualization guy, and the music person, and then and all of those people had other jobs at Brown and contributed to this. So it is very much a Brown project in a way that maybe some of the other contributors who aren't at Brown feel like it's maybe too much of a Brown project, because Brown has invested a lot in it, and so they really promote it as a Brown project. So it's like a kind of sometimes uncomfortable tie to the institution, I think. Brown, we now have one assistant professor in the initiative who is publishing her first book as a digital book. But initially they would only accept tenured people into the initiative because they didn't want, what Brown would say, and built into their funding from Mellon from the very beginning, is that they wanted to create examples of academic scholarship that would merit tenure or promotion through our normal conventional things, but that they felt we needed to create a lot of examples first, so that colleagues who don't have any experience with this can understand, oh, this is not the same as a blog post, or like not all digital things are the same. This book went through peer review with University of Virginia. It's published with the University Press, in some ways it's very conventional. And that was by design. So Brown's agenda is to kind of produce a lot of digital scholarship in order to make more of it possible for new generations of scholars. So there's probably a lot more to say, but you're muted if you're.
Sorry, I was just talking to my son. No.
Oh, okay. Okay, sorry.
I was just telling him what your project is about.
Good, excellent. Have him play with it.
But thank you for that. That was a wonderful and very helpful grounding in the undertaking.
Yeah, thank you. Was it Tekla? Were you next? I think I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, I'm afraid.
Yeah, it's Tekla, but
Tekla, sorry. Yeah,
definitely not obvious from the spelling. So yeah, this is such an amazing book. I am really excited to spend much time getting to know it. So I was struck by your reference to the liturgical cantus firmus in those fugues. I mean, I know Maier probably didn't actually write the fugues, but he chose them. And
he chose them, yeah.
It kind of brings in this Christian element into something that's, I guess, mainly kind of pagan, coming from Ovid. And I was wondering, are there any other Christian elements in the book? Is it kind of like that Neoplatonic mixture of pagan and Christian elements, or is it just like these liturgical cantus firmi are just kind of the one Christian thing in the book?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Thank you for that. So he addresses the music in the preface or the letter to the reader, and he kind of says, the music is there to set the mood, and that's the point of the music. Mm-hmm. And so if we take him seriously, then what mood is he setting? He is setting a sacred mood for all of this, even as there's all this, classical wild stuff going on, there's a piece here that I would love to explore and just haven't had the time to do it, which is the kind of way he's trying to historicize alchemy and to, on the one hand, draw on a kind of medieval alchemical tradition. And I do think that the music might be part of that as well. And, of course, alchemy arrived in Europe in the Middle Ages and was absolutely kind of synthesized with Christian theology in lots of different ways. So the philosopher's stone is Christ, and, blah, 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 blah. And that's important to him still. There's not a lot of it in the you know, if you did keyword searches, I don't think there's one for Christ, for example, which is unusual for alchemical text. So it's kind of in the background, or it's the cantus firmus, I guess, you know, underlying everything. But he's also then layering this classical stuff on top of it. So I think there's something interesting going on there that I just haven't fully explored. I would invite anyone who wants to go for it. Yeah, but at the same time, you know, so how familiar this is to you, but it's John Farmer's Ways, and so which were plain songs over a cantus firmus, and I gather were sort of, you know, to practice liturgical singing, and so it's an interesting setting, I think, for a book like this.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more to say about it, but it's a great question. Yeah, thank you. Tiffany, I think I see a yellow hand. Is Tiffany here? Oh, yes, she is. There, sorry. Oh, you're muted.
There we go. Thank you again so much for that presentation. I have used your website in the course that I teach on literature and alchemy, but I didn't quite realize all the features. So that collection feature is amazing. I have my students write papers on alchemical keywords. And so that's a sort of brilliant path through this particular text. So thank you for
I would love to hear more.
Taking us through that. Yeah, I'd be happy to sort of take that up with you at some other time. But the question I have is maybe one that kind of directs us back a little bit to the literary element, to the text itself. And I've often wondered do you happen to know, or maybe there's an essay that I haven't read that's out there about this, but is the format of the emblemata, is that in a particular kind of verse form? And is there any relation of that to the fugue, to the sort of musical setting? Are they analogous at all?
Yeah, so I think I'm over my skis immediately on this. We need a Latinist. Where's our Colin? Are you our classicist here? No, Joan, who's yeah, I think that my Latin's just not good enough to appreciate this, but I think that the Latin verses are quite interesting, actually, from what some of the people involved in the project have said and what I've looked at a little bit. I just don't have enough of an appreciation for that. The question of the relationship between the text and the music is such an interesting one, because for so many years, everyone just assumed that like this was some Gesamtkunstwerk that was all, you know, he wrote this music and he integrated all this stuff. But if he took the music from somewhere else, then, I mean, of course, as you say, Tikla, he's putting it together and he's choosing it. So that is itself a form of authorship, right? But it's not the same exactly. And so in trying to fit these together. So there's definitely connections between the way the music works and some of the emblems, like the one with the two birds that are crossing and some of the music that goes backwards and forwards. There's definitely something going on with the, you know, a kind of mirroring going on between the sound and the text, I guess. And I'm trying to think of which of the essays, I mean, deals specific, some of these are sort of memories of conversations rather than things that are actually in the essays. I mean, Lauren's essay, yeah, so I mean, there's a bit of it in Eric Bianchi, but actually, now that I'm thinking about it, some of the best conversations about precisely that point came from the singers who were involved in this project. So Les Canards Chantants, who have done a lot of performances where they perform one of the emblems and sort of given a lecture alongside of it. And they ultimately weren't able to contribute to the volume, but they were the ones who had that insight. So it's not in the essays as I'm looking at it, but they were the ones who really were playing around with that.
And there's another moment of that sort of multimodal reading, right, where you can imagine bringing together an art historian who could talk about the images, literary scholars, in addition to musicologists. So yeah, super interesting.
And, you know, and they also, Les Canards Chantants, they're also wonderful in their performances, because they would like the music that, I could find it, but it would take me too long to find it, that there's music printed halfway and then you're supposed to sing halfway and then read it backwards. And there's another one that's sort of upside down. And when they do these performances, they would sort of, as they're singing, you know, walk towards each other and then walk away from each other. And their performances are really amazing in terms of making you really see what's going on with the music. And the cross one, they would be at different corners and they would cross each other on the stage. But it's not captured in this edition. So yeah.
Thank you.
Daniel.
Yeah, if you're the host, you can't raise your yellow hand, it seems. Is it gonna, do you think it's gonna be possible in, I don't know, 10, 20, 50 years to read Furnace and Fugue? And was the kind of longevity, or even in a less accessible way, to somehow archive it for a motivated, because say what you will about Dead Trees, I think about this with more mundane digital projects where there wouldn't really be a problem to store just a fully online journal, but you kind of wonder, because Dead Trees have proven themselves as phenomenal ways to make things last. So I'm just curious what.
That's the obvious, well, not obvious, but that's a problem, right? So this is where, if Allison Levy were here, who's the digital scholarship editor at Brown, who's in charge of all these projects, and Brown now has like 8 maybe or 9 or something of them. So keep an eye on these because they're all completely different and all really interesting. That is one of the tasks of the initiative, is to figure that piece of it out. And so Brown's projects are published with lots of different presses. So Stanford has a bunch of digital books now, and some of our authors are going with Stanford, and we went with Virginia, and so what that means is that each of us has a different relationship with the press that we're publishing with. In the case of Furnace and Fugue, it's going to be hosted at Brown for the foreseeable future. And they will support it for some time, but then in 20 years, or frankly, I've wondered, if I leave Brown, will they keep supporting it as much if I have left? What the people involved in the project at Brown are in the library, and so they think about these things, and they sort of say, well, at some point we might choose to archive it or just turn it into text files. Of course they have those. All these essays began as Microsoft Word documents and were copy edited up until the very end point as Word documents. So it'd be possible to extract the content, but one of the reasons we chose not to do a print edition alongside of this is because if we took ourselves seriously, that the interactivity was the point and was the argument and was really at the heart of this, then it can't be turned into paper. The essays could be, but even there, some of the essays are more interactive than others, but we wanted to really stand by our claim that this had to be digital and that we couldn't just turn it into paper, and that might mean that it's lost at some point. So hopefully it won't go as quickly as some do. I mean, it doesn't take long for some digital projects, right, to just become inactive, but that's part of the experiment. I have to say, I have a weird distance from this project sometimes, where I'm so curious about it, just how it was created and what people will do with it and how it works, that I am, more so than my real books, I'm able to distance myself from it somehow and sort of say, this will be so curious to see what happens to it. Whereas if someone said, we're ripping up your Anna Zieglerin book and burning all of them, I would be devastated. But somehow this one, I'm interested in precisely that question, among others. I think you've all asked very good questions. So
I think, yeah, we're remarkably on the announced time as well as,
yes.
But it seems like people have asked the questions they have. So I guess on behalf of everyone in the audience, just thanks so much, Tara. That clearly everyone, I think I can speak for everyone, that the project is really special. And I think we'll all be spending some more time looking at it. I gather even some of the audience members who've clearly spent a fair amount of time will, I think, be discovering new dimensions. And yes, thanks so much for joining us also at such a relatively late hour on your side of the country.
It's 9 o'clock. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for all your great questions. And truly, you know, I mean, Tiffany, you're teaching with it, or any of you are experimenting with it. We're sort of at the point, or I'm at the point anyway, where I just want to see what people do with it, you know, and I'm dying to know what students make of it, or, you know, what musicians make of it, or musicologists, you know. So let me know if you have any exciting adventures in Atalanta land. Yeah, thank you. And thanks for having me, and good luck with your quarter, and good luck to us all in the coming month or so.
Thanks, Tara.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Great to see you
Thank
all.
you so much.
Meet you.